Hey guys, I am getting ready to build a double flute out of red cedar, and so I thought I'd let you jump in and see how I go through this whole process. Well, first off, we are gonna pick out the wood, and I want red cedar, so I've got a piece of red cedar over here. This is a piece that I think I cut down about 2 years ago, so it must have been about 2.5 years ago that it's just been resting here, hanging out, and all of this is red cedar and black locust, so it doesn't rot very fast at all. So I'm gonna cut it somewhere down here at the end. I'm just gonna cut just a rough cut of about 3 feet long. All right, at this point I'm going to cut the length of about 22 inches. I'm going to cut 2 of them for each flute. 22 inches gives me enough length for the key of G, since this particular flute needs to be in the key of G. And I'm going to be doing both of them the same length. This particular red cedar has lots of little knots in them. Not any major dry knots, but mostly pin knots and things like that. And that's what gives this particular flute, or double flute, character. You can see here that it's got a lot of little defects on the inside, and I have to mark out the sections that I don't want. So obviously that section, this is the section that I want right here. So I'm going to use that section, and I'm going to split it. This is what it looks like on the inside, and I'm just going to take it to the bandsaw to rough cut it out from this point. This is what it looks like. That's the section that I wanted, and I'm pretty happy with it. And I will do the same thing for the second piece. This piece, I'm just, instead of splitting it all out, I just cut it all on the bandsaw. Here I am with the 2 pieces, and I'm going to check the moisture content. We're right at 15.3% moisture content, which is high. And that's simply because it's been outside. So once I bore out the inside on the lathe, it'll dry out within a few days. First off, I'm going to need to find the middle section here. Just marked it, and I've got a 3/4 inch auger bit that I'm going to just get started by just drilling in about 1/2 inch or 3/4 of an inch, just enough for me to attach it to the lathe. And I do that on both sides. I've got it hooked up to the lathe, and I'm going to make sure everything is nice and tight. And the first thing I got to do is just shape the outside, make it decently smooth. Working with red cedar can be pretty chippy. Definitely this section, it just sort of all just kind of explodes sometimes, so you got to be careful. Here I'm just checking, make sure it's decently smooth. I want to get it about an inch and 1/4 wide. I'm flipping it around, and I'm going to get the section that I was not able to get earlier. Okay, that's about an inch and 1/4 wide. Before we go any further, I wanted to show you, these are auger bits. They are probably about 14 or 16 inches long. But when you get these at Lowe's or Home Depot or whatever big box store, they typically have this little screw on the end that helps drive the auger bit into the wood. But what I did here is I took these were originally the same, but what I did is I modified this one so that it can go into the wood, it can go into the flute bore and bore out the flute without it digging and grabbing the flute and pulling it out of the lathe. So what I did is just took a hacksaw and cut that off, and then pretty much just, it's hard to really explain, but I wanted to show you here the angle that I cut it with the grinding wheel, so that kind of gives you an idea the angle there. And I put a cutting edge right here, so that way it's going to cut the wood when it goes into the lathe when it's being turned, but it's not going to pull the wood towards the auger and pull it off the lathe chuck. So anyway, hope that helps you understand how I did that. The other option is that you could get a boring, like a barrel boring auger bit type, and that is good, but they're really expensive. So this is how I came up with that. So now I'm just going to put some oil with a little brush onto the auger bit here, and that's going to help it from squeaking as bad, as well as just let it be a little bit more smooth when it's cutting out the bore. And it just go really smoothly. I'm just going to take off a little bit at a time, and it's just taking the material from the inside out. There are different ways to do this, but this is the way I like to do it. It's the most simple way of doing it with the most simple tools as possible. There are other ways to do it that's more complex, and there are other ways to do it more safer. So you'll have to just try what works best for you, and if you don't feel comfortable doing it, then you can try a different approach. Here I am taking this rod and I'm inserting it in there as far as it goes so I can get the length of the internal bore. I make a mark there, see that mark there, and now I'm going to measure 3/4 of an inch And this 3/4 of an inch, I'm not going to bore out. So see, from that line, the first line I did, to the second line is pretty much going to be an internal wall. So I'm going to bore out. I'm going to bore out on both sides, but keep that 3/4 of an inch wall. And then what I do is take the auger bit and hold it up to that second line, put my finger on there, put a piece of tape so I can know how far I should take the auger bit into the flute. So it makes it that wall of 3/4 of an inch. Sometimes it gets a bit squeaky, and it's because it's rubbing up against those knots. If you have nice clean wood, then you won't deal with that. Here I am verifying the length of the internal bores. Both sides look good. It gives me 3/4 of an inch solid wall on the inside. So at this point I take a 3/16 inch brad point drill bit, and I'm drilling right where those lines are, just on the outside of the lines. One is for the airflow coming up the fipple, and the second one is for the true sound hole. Now I'm going to put it back on the lathe, and I'm going to do some shaping with the spindle gouge here. I'm pretty much going to make this first surface. This is where the 2 holes are drilled for the fipple. I'm going to make that surface pretty straight, the thickness pretty straight for the first 5 inches there. And then after 5 inches, I will taper it down to the end, which is the right side of the flute there. I'm going to taper it down. So it's going to go from about 1 1/4 inches thick down to about 1 inch thick at the end. At this point, I put this little jig vise that I built, and I put this on there, and I put the flute on there, and this helps me begin to work on the mouthpiece, the fipple, and the true sound hole. So I'm going to take this rasp here and rasp it flat, and this is where the block is going to sit. The block is what controls and directs the airflow. So this is really intricate and really important, this whole section. I'm making little lines in these holes to turn the circle holes into little rectangles. And I'm going to take, instead of drilling it out or rasping it out, I'm going to take this propane burner and I'm going to burn it out. And the reason why I burn it is because it takes away all the little fibers, the little things that are hard to file out. It burns it, and I think something about the burning also makes the sound much better. I think it almost like tempers or hardens the edge of the true sound hole. I don't know the science behind all this, but after so many flutes that I've built, I've just noticed that burning the edge of the little holes here helps the sound. And now I'm going to start filing, really creating really nice edges on these little rectangles. little rectangle holes. Nice clean surface. You know, this is where the air flows through, and then also where the air splits. And so everything has to be really intricately done, really clean, and that way the air has no, you want to reduce the amount of resistance for the airflow, and then you also want to create the type of sound that you want, whether it's a whispery sound, a loud clear voice, or a more breathy voice. There's different types of things you can do to create whatever type of voicing you want for the sound. This is where I make the channel. I'm just carving out a channel with right now I've got a 1/4 inch chisel. Go back and forth between a 1/4 inch and a 1/2 inch chisel, and then after I cut that little channel out about 1 millimeter deep, then I just take sandpaper and sand it. All right, so at this point we will put this block. This is the block or the bird, and we'll put it on here to see how it sounds. You cover up the first hole and you cover up the chamber with it, and that's what directs the airflow. And this little edge right here is called the true sound hole, and that's where it splits the wind and creates sound waves. So let's see how it sounds. All right, cool. That sounds pretty good. I just love the way this red cedar sounds. It's such a warm sound. All right, so now at this point we can put it back on the lathe and do kind of finishing work of really get the thickness that we want and the length that we want and things like that. All right, so I got this guy pretty much turned and rough sanded down. I got the thickness that I want, the shape that I want. I'm pretty happy with this. However, there's one major thing that we got to keep in mind, and that is moisture content. So as you saw at the beginning of the video, it had, what was that, like 14% moisture content. So at this point, what I have to do is I have to just let it dry for a little bit longer. And since I took a lot of material off and it's hollow on the inside, I'm going to have to wait for it to just, the moisture just to come out. So I can do that in different ways. The fastest way that I've found is you put it inside a bunch of shavings. So you put it inside of a bunch of shavings and you cover it up like this. And then you just put a fan on it and let the fan not blow directly on it because it'll blow it all away, but just let it kind of air just kind of sift through and make sure the air kind of sifts through a little bit through the bore, and then you just let it sit for maybe 2 or 3 days, and then check the moisture content. And so that's what I'll do. And then meanwhile, I'm going to make the other flute, which is going to be the exact same process that I just went through. I'll just try to make the exact same size, the same shape and everything, and then put both of them and let them dry for 2 or 3 days, and I'll check it again, see what the moisture content is, and then we'll go from there. All right, so at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to establish the angle that I want them to be at with the mouthpiece. And so this is an A-frame flute, so obviously I got to pick what angle that I want, and generally it's something like this. if you kind of like the typical A that you would, capital A that you would draw in a, that you would write out, you want it to be a little bit thinner. So a typical A is something like about like this. And so you want it a little bit thinner. So that angle, obviously, I don't know exactly what angle that is, and my apologies for those of you who like degrees and angles and all that kind of stuff. For me, a lot of times I eyeball things according to what I think looks best and feels best for the flute, and then I make that decision. So for me, with this flute, I really feel like this angle is about right. So what I do is I'm using the lines from this workbench. You can see the lines here, and these are joints from the 2x4s that are glued together. So if you see here, what I'm doing is I'm going to line up the two mouthpieces where this line is, and I make an A. Okay, so I make the A angle that I want, and then I take this piece of wood and I'm going to put it where this joint is. So I'm going to put it right at this joint, and I'm just kind of eyeballing it from above. And then at that point, I take a pencil and I just make a light mark going across. Okay, so that's where I want that to be. I can make this closer this way if I wanted to, or further away, but I really like the way that this is. So the way that's going to end up being is this is going to be something like this, pretty close. So we'll start with that, and what I'll do is I'll take this over miter saw now that I have these angles, and I'll use the same angle for each side of the flute. And just so you know, it ended up being 10 degrees on the miter saw, and I want to say this, see where the two holes are right up at the top. You got to make sure that those holes are perfectly angled up. You don't want them to be angled to the side while you're cutting. Otherwise, once you put the two flutes together, it's going to be off. So you got to make sure that those two holes on both of the flutes when you're cutting are flat up straight. So I've been working just a little bit on the mouthpiece, pretty much just using some small files like this and some chisels, just to pretty much kind of get the shape of the airflow as best as possible. So I'm pretty happy at this point with the way that they sound. That was pretty good. That one's good. They're very different. The same wood and everything, but they have different sound, which I like for a double flute, because you want the difference between the two different sounds. So this one's a little bit more of a real direct, punchy sound, and this one's a softer but also loud sound. So that's what I want. Here I've just got some pieces of leather that I've cut into strips about 1/2 inch wide and about, I guess that's about 16 inches long. And then I got my block, just put it right on top of there. Put the leather in place, kind of tension it down with my fingers, and then make a little knot there. That way it kind of holds in place and kind of locks it in. So at this point, I'm going to use a tuner. This particular customer wanted it in 432 hertz, and they wanted it to be in the key of G. So I've got this little tuner. I'm going to put it at 432 hertz instead of 440. And then I'm going to tune it up to G. So right now it's flat, so you can hear. So it's somewhere around here. It needs to be up here to the middle. So all I got to do is cut off a little bit at the end, and I keep testing it until every time I cut it off, the pitch is going to get a little bit higher. And so I'm going to keep cutting off the end just little by little until it gets to exactly where I want it with G. Got these two guys tuned up. At this point, I'm going to put a center line going down the middle. I need to mark the holes, where the holes are going to go. This flute here is going to have 5 holes, and this flute is going to have 3 holes. So I'm going to go ahead and start marking them up for the holes. I'm not going to go into too much detail on the placement of the holes in this video, but there are a lot of good videos and information online that you can get to show you exactly where to put the holes. Okay, I got my flutes marked up. This is a pentatonic scale, so these first 3 holes are going to give the same notes on both sides, but then on this chanter side, this is the chanter side, this is the drone side. The chanter side is going to have 5 holes, so you can go up and down the scale. This one you have an option of three different holes, which is 4 different notes. So that's how we do that. I'm going to use just a small brad bit point like this. I think this is probably 1/8 of an inch. It was a really rainy day, and it made it hard to tune because when I would play the note, it would get mixed up with the rain noise. But I still kept moving forward because you just got to keep moving forward and figure out a way. But so pretty much what I'm doing here is I'm tuning it to a minor pentatonic scale, and since the bass note is in G, I cover up all the holes and take one finger off at a time from the bottom going up, and I'm tuning it in a minor pentatonic scale. And for me to go in depth about this would mean probably another video, but for now I thought I'd show you at least kind of what it looks like and my process of doing that. This one's a little bit flat. And for this flute, here I'm going to be making the mouthpiece. I'm using a piece of mahogany, and mahogany is really nice it blends. It's a nice contrasting blend with red cedar. And what I do is I just got to make sure it matches up really nice, and I'm going to be gluing up these pieces together. So I'm not trying to clamp it, I'm more just trying to make sure that everything is matched up really nice so I don't have to force clamp it in place. So this takes a lot of time, a lot of really light shaving, and what I'm going to be doing is putting some Titebond 2 on it, and I will be just taping it on instead of clamping it. Clamping, if you try to use clamps and things like that with this type of, you know, awkward shape of the flute and the mouthpiece and everything, it's better just to tape it, and it works quite well that way. But meanwhile, over at the Evergreen farm, we got Piggy, who got out of the fence, and Ducky, who, I don't know what she does. She just walks around and quacks all day. Now I'm going to glue this one in place. So now I'm just going to put some glue here. Make sure the glue is spread around pretty good. I'm going to simply press it in place. Another thing I'm going to do is just slightly put this together like this, because I noticed that it's trying to kind of slowly come out. Here I am creating a brace with the same type of wood, the mahogany, and I'm cutting it at the angle that is needed. I use a miter saw because it gets a nice clean cut. So now we are going to put this little crossbar here to kind of connect it. I'm just putting T up at the top to mark the top. I have to round it at the shape of the outside of those flutes. So the way I do that is just use a little 1/4 inch chisel. Make sure it's super sharp. And I'm going to carve the rough shape of the outside of the flute. I'm just looking at the diameter and just kind of making a close guess. And I'm going to carve it, being careful with the edge there, because if I carve all the way across, then it'll chip out, so I have to go the other direction. At this point, I take a piece of bamboo that's the same diameter as the flute, or a little bit smaller than the flute. Put some sandpaper on there. I'm using 80 grit sandpaper, getting it at the angle that I want, and just sand forward and backwards. See, this is the other side. I do the exact same thing on the other side. This is quite nice. I really enjoy this process. So we're going to put it up to the flute and see how it looks. And After some going back and forth, it's looking quite nice. So you can see that it's a nice fit. Alright, so at this point I'm going to just make it look a little bit better. Not so straight looking. I'm putting some curves in there. I'm going to use a 1-inch chisel to carve it out. Carve out that curve. Need to use rasps to really smooth it out, and a scraper, and then sandpaper. See, now it is got sort of a cool curve to it. I'm going to sand the T off. I'm going to sand it up to 220, and then I can glue it on. Just kind of pressing it in place. Not too hard, because otherwise it'll knock it off of the mouthpiece. But once I get it taped there, we're good to go. We can move on to making the little birds. And these are 2 little birds that sit on top of the blocks. And I have a little template here that I'm marking on a thicker piece of wood. This is about 1.5 inches thick. I put it on the bandsaw, and what I do is I cut out the shape of the bird, almost completely cut out. And then what I do is I turn, I make it 2 marks so that we can cut out 3 pieces, and you'll see in a second what I'm talking about. And then I finish up cutting the outside of the markings of the bird, and look what it did. It made 3 little birds for us, and that way I can choose the 2 best. At this point I'm going to sand it. I'm not going to need to do a lot of intricate carving. I'm mostly just sanding the edges, kind of rounding off the tail of the birds, and the beaks. I'm just sort of giving it a nice shape so it's not so square. Here I'm making the blocks. I got to make 2 blocks. These 2 blocks have to be the same size, and I'm going to bore out a little hole that the leather straps are going to slip through. You'll see what I'm talking about in a minute. After we get it all sanded, I'm going to be able to get the straps in. So at this point I'm just going to put a finish, a true oil finish on the birds. I like this true oil, especially for flutes. I don't do it for stringed instruments, but for flutes it's really nice to use this true oil. I usually do 3 coats of true oil. Meanwhile, I'm going to be making the mouthpiece. I'm going to shape it so that it's nice and fits the mouth really nice, but also aesthetically appealing. Those are the 2 holes there. One hole that goes to the left flute, and the right hole that goes to the right flute. And I kind of have to drill it at an angle so that it goes right into that chamber, as you see. Once it gets past the wood, it'll go into the chamber so that the airflow goes in there without any interruption. So on the bandsaw, I'm just doing a rough cut of taking off the major parts of this mouthpiece so that I can get to the part where I can do some hand carving, doing some rasping and things like that. So I'm kind of cutting at an angle. This way it gives me the angle that I want on both sides. I need to cut a mark right in between the 2 holes, and then use a file, a 6-sided file, to just smooth it out. You can see I do it in that type of motion, so it's kind of curved. This is going to make a good division between the 2 holes. Now I'm going to do some more sanding. smoothing the edges, rounding it off so that it kind of fits the mouth quite nice. See there? This is how I like it. It's rough sanded, so now I need to start at 80 grit and just smooth it all out, sand the whole flute all the way up to 220. This takes a while. It's important to really get it nice and smooth. I take this little pad that's flexible. It's a little rubber pad. And I just sand and sand and sand. It takes a while. I start with 120 because I've already rough sanded it at 80. And then I just keep sanding, make it look really nice on all sections. And then I'm going to use this True Oil to apply the first coat. And the way I do this is just pretty much rub it on, but I really want to make sure that it's a nice thin coat. If it's too thick, it's going to get gummy and it won't really dry. It will just stay kind of gummy. So it's important to put a really thin coat and then wait for it to dry. I usually let it dry for at least 6 hours. Sometimes it's a day, sometimes it's even 2 days if it's needed. It's kind of depends on the humidity levels and stuff like that. I put 3 coats of True Oil, and then I'm going to put the birds onto the blocks. And I use 2-part epoxy, mixing it up really nice, and set the birds in place. I'm going to still have to put a little bit of finish on the blocks and put the straps on. Besides that, it's all ready. Okay, so we are pretty much at the point where we are about, I would say 95 to 98% finished. So we have put 3 layers of the True Oil or any type of like Danish oil or something like that that kind of soaks in there. I don't want too much of a shiny finish for this, so I'm not going to go for the real polished shiny finish. Since this is a red cedar flute, I just like it just as authentic and real and sort of more that natural look to it. At this point, it sounds pretty good, so I'm going to play it for you and let you hear how it sounds. However, we still need to do some micro tuning, and the way we do micro tuning is pretty much using the same method that I did earlier with the iron, heating up an iron like this to red hot, and then you just have a tuner and you just do real micro tuning. So you just touch it just a little bit and it just removes a little bit of that hole. It makes the hole a little bit bigger. And so I still need to do some more micro tuning to get it, you know, exactly in pitch, but it does sound good. This is in the key of G, and here's how it sounds. So yeah, I'm pretty happy with it, and I think that our customer will like this. And so anyway, I hope that you enjoyed this whole process. What I'll do at the end of this video is just show some photos of it, but I really hope you enjoyed it and learned something about making double flutes and lathe turned flutes. I know that was a big video, but thank you for taking the time to watch. And if you like it, subscribe. And if you want more videos, let me know. I'd be happy to help in any way possible. So thank you.